I could gather, if I could, without breaking COMA violations, 2 other board members and request a special emergency meeting if need be, if that was rejected from being on the agenda. But that's kind of silly to have to do that. We should be able to add items. So I would highly encourage adding that to that. Again, with my president right now, I don't have a problem, but other boards across the state, they do have that problem getting items added when they would like. So with all of that, probably talking faster than I planned on, but I fully support my, this bill. I think it's needed. And again, I think the only thing you might want to think about is that private contact with a citizen, a parent, or one of your employees. And again, when I go to take action on that, say like, then I have to email my superintendent separate on that, say, look, I've got this problem with the student, et cetera, then those emails would still be subject to CORA. They could redact that parent name if need be, but you maintain that privacy and that conversation between you and the parent, constituent, or employee. But I thank you for your time, and I don't know, do you have any questions? Or?
Thank you, Amy, and I'll ask you to come back for questions if someone calls on your name, and thank you for serving in your local school board.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dave Traver with Kansas Policy Institute. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Dave Traver with Kansas Policy Institute. We very much support this bill. Each provision of it is based on information we've gotten from a lot of school board members across the state. Every single one is an example. There's multiple examples of these. Each one of these issues also is a barrier to improving public education. These are, I hate to say it this way, but these are conscious efforts to try to silence some school board members, to say, no, you may not raise an issue because you aren't the president, you aren't the superintendent. School board members supervise school districts. On what basis does it make sense to have the staff be able to tell their boss, no, you may not have information, you may not raise an issue for discussion? I mean, we have more kids below grade level in Kansas than are proficient. Every one of these issues is a barrier to fixing that. There's a table here on page 2 of my testimony that shows you. I'll just give you a couple of examples. These are high school math results. Johnson County has more kids below grade level in math in high school than are proficient. 34% below grade level, 31% proficient. That's about as good as it gets. Finney County at 68% below grade level, 7% proficient. These achievement levels are bad, and they've been getting worse. And there's a conscious effort to try to push this under the rug. We'll talk about graduation rates. We don't want to talk about achievement. Board members are elected to represent their patrons and to try to improve student achievement. They have to be able to do their jobs. I would suggest 2 amendments to this. In section 1E, it may not be clear, and I base this on having been in school board meetings and knowing how sometimes things try to get interpreted to not have to do something, to not be transparent. So I would suggest adding this sentence to section 1E. Public comment time may not be held as separate meetings and must be recorded as part of any audio or video recordings of board meetings. There's been a real push in the last couple of years in some school districts to silence parents. They want to hold these comments outside the board meeting so they don't have to record it. They don't want people to know what's going on. Also in section 1H, to say that emails to board members must be sent directly to them and cannot be routed through a district office or screened by district staff. I mean, imagine if your constituent emails had to go through the governor's office. I don't care whether it's a Democrat or Republican. There's communications are between you and your constituents, and there shouldn't be any staff in between there. So these are all needed. This is requests from school board members, and they need this information to be able to improve student achievement. And with that, I'll be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
All right, thank you, Dave. Next, we have Ward Cassidy, Kansas School Board Resource Center, and former representative or senator? Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee.
All right, welcome.
2010 and 2014, I was the chairman of Education and Finance and got in trouble on a daily basis. Randy remembers. I think it's just you and I don't know, what, Valdini, did you come in 2010? And one thing I've learned, Madam Chair, is that the respect for everybody in the legislature. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Everybody has to work pretty darn hard here. And the worst thing you can do is have a 3:30 committee meeting. And that's when they would stick me, thanks to good old Mike O'Neill. But since the legislature, I left in 2014. I had a grandson that was a great basketball player at Wichita State, who never got to play much, but I watched every game that they had for 2 years. From then, as soon as I left here, I went to work for the Dane G. Hansen Foundation. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. That's a foundation in Northwest Kansas we give away. We're just about to finish up. We interview 140 students from Salina to Weston, Kansas. And we get to ask them questions. We interview them for 25 minutes, and 120 get a lot of money. The worst award we give is $4,000 renewable. So I've been actively involved with that area of the state since I left here. And one of the questions I always ask the kids when they leave, and I'm not supposed to know the question, but even if you know it, is, I'm your principal, what can you do to make your school better? And it's really interesting to hear top students give comments from Salina to Weston on what they can do to make their school board better. One is, this has nothing to do with the testimony, right? I'll get to it, but it's better teachers, more teachers. We can't find people in Western Kansas. But why I even took this job is I care more about students than I care about anything else. I have an educational specialist degree in school finance. I turned down 5 superintendent's jobs in my life because I always wanted to work with kids. And I'm still working with kids on an almost daily basis. With this opportunity, I've been watching education. It's not going as well as we would like in the state, and I can't think one of you could disagree with that. Since then, I've talked to over 200 board members since November 30th, something like that, when we actually got this thing started. I haven't talked to anyone that's opposed to this, not one. They would all like to have the opportunity to be contacted. And I mean, I almost have to laugh. I've called school districts and asked for their email numbers or their school board emails, and they laugh at me. No, you with the Kansas Policy Institute? No way are we giving you those. You know, you hate schools. A quick story, when I was here, I won't tell you what I threatened Dave, but I was really mad at him because all I ever heard him say was cut education, here's the facts. You know, after I was here a couple of years, I found out those facts were right. You know, everybody slants things. State Department of Education, Kansas School Board, KSB, whoever you are, you're slanting things to your favor. But there are facts out there that are always factual. There's a state law that says every superintendent is supposed to take his school board, look at your state assessments, and adjust your budget accordingly. Do you know what percentage of schools I've talked to do that? Low, low, low. School board members don't even know that law exists. That's ridiculous. How could you run a business that way? I mean, you can't run a business that way. You have to know where the problem areas are, and you have to take that money and adjust it to those problems. And then you're going to have good results. But if we can't even talk to school board members, if you're a constituent, you know, I can't call or text you because I don't have your information. That's, again, it's something everybody statewide, if you're a school board member, you should know you're going to have your email listed, your constituents can contact you. It's that simple on that. I mean, at times as a legislator, I didn't want to be contacted on certain bills, but that's okay. That's part of the job. Other things I would have to say, all of this makes sense. But the complaints that school board members have about being held down, that their superintendent, who they hired, won't allow them to do things. I know great superintendents. I would list them, the ones that I know, some great. And those board members, they work together like a unit. And they're making their school and the education for their students a #1 priority, not who's more powerful, who's this, Republican, Democrat, whatever you might be. Let's look at the kids and get the best results. But if you can't get information to them and let them speak up, you want to improve education, here's a great chance. It's an easy bill. So with that, I'll come back for questions. Left a lot of things out. You can see I'm sort of passionate about trying to get education in the right direction. Thank you.
All right, Ward, I'm sorry I missed you. I came in 2015, so I didn't get to hear you on the floor. But committee, what questions do you have for our proponents? And before I do take those questions, is there anyone that we missed that made the deadline with Garrett? Because he's pretty strict. We had some people miss it on both sides, proponents and opponents. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Don't know who can answer this, but this bill, when you get into the third page and the fourth page, actually second page, deals with a number of terms that are involving law enforcement. Is there some special reason? I guess I don't understand. For example, it says automated license plate recognition system. So how did those get in there?
We'll let Nick answer that, but a lot of times when you touch a statute, things get added, or they're included for context. Nick.
So, yeah, this is in Section 2 of the bill, which is amending a current statute, KSA 45-217. This relates to the Kansas Open Records Act and definitions under the Kansas Open Records Act. The reason this is in there and being amended is because on page 4, you can see that the definition of public record does not include, and it goes through and says records that are made, maintained, or kept by an individual who is a member of the legislature or the governing body of any political or taxing subdivision of the state. And since this is making a change to how those records are subject to KORA, there's an exception in this definition to provide for the change that's being made in this bill.
So all of the records I, as a legislator, maintain and files are discoverable?
Those are not public records. So those are not considered public records under the definition of a public record under KORA. So your records are not subject to the KORA.
One more question?
Yes, you may, but I will add to that, Representative Johnson, though, if you were to email this entire committee or majority of this committee, then you would be subject. And that would be true if you were on a city council or a county commission or any taxing entity.
Undercover agent. On the last page. That needs to be in this bill?
Well, again, we're amending this statute. So this is, these definitions pertain to the whole KORA, the whole Kansas Open Records Act. So I would assume that there's some exception to disclosure for records that are made, maintained, or kept by an undercover agent. I could probably find that provision for you.
No, you do not need to do that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions? Representative Allison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Nick, along those same lines, does that mean that bullet point number 2 on your memo, the KS legislators are not subject to that same?
So no, the records maintained by legislators would be exempt as a public record under KORA, so those would not be considered public records under KORA, whereas records that are made, maintained, or kept by members of a school district pursuant to that section 1 under the bullet point 2 that you noted would be subject to disclosure if they're pertaining to the business of the body.
So this could be an example of what's good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander?
Nick's not he's not going to answer political questions.
Maybe it's just hypothetical.
Would you like to ask someone else?
No, it'll be-
Okay. Ward, I will ask you a question. Come on up, Ward.
Madam Chair.
All right, so I was going to ask about what Representative Owsley was asking about, because I do like to be fair. If we're going to ask of one entity, then we should ask of the other entity. And so on B, it would be the only taxing entity that would be subject to CORA if we didn't amend that per Amy's suggestions. How do you feel about that, having been an elected official here at the State House? Do you feel like that's fair?
You know, in a way, I never felt like I'm transparent. If I don't want to hide anything that I do. So I guess that would be my answer. If it's something that is done in a fair and honest manner in committee or in a school board meeting, it should be open.
But it's not parallel. So then would your recommendation be that all of our records be open if they're not?
You know, I'm not, some of you guys could probably answer that question better than I. I don't have a
Fair
perfect
enough.
answer for that. I really don't.
No worries. Just a curiosity. Any other questions? Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just might not be familiar enough with this, but are we talking about school board members' personal emails? Are there school boards out there that do not have a @usd.whatever for their school board members? So people are not able to find out an official school board member email? I'm not familiar with
If
that.
this were to be passed, then they would be required to have an email that they would provide. If the school didn't have an email for them, they would need to give one. And it would only pertain to those matters that related to the school board.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Any other questions? All right, thank you to our proponents for testifying, and we'll go on to neutral. I don't believe that there were any neutral testimonies provided. Garrett's shaking his head. So we'll go on to our opponent section of the hearing, and we first have Shannon Kimball, private citizen.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Shannon Kimball. I represent today both the USD 497 Board of Education as an entity and myself as a private individual. I am currently president of the USD 497 Board. I'm in my 12th year on my local board. I've served 3 terms as vice president, and this is my 3rd term as board president. I stand in opposition to House Bill 2382 based on my extensive experience as a board leader and a board member, in addition to my personal background and training in good governance and board practices. The parents and community leaders on boards of education are elected by the very same voters that elect members of this body. Board members serve long hours under public scrutiny and oversight, just as you do, and just as do all other elected officials at the state and local level who serve the citizens of Kansas. This bill targets school board members with harshly different and onerous requirements for conducting the business of school boards on which they serve. Such harshly different treatment is unwarranted, it's ill-advised, and it's contrary to law. In my written testimony to the committee, I've provided details supporting the extensive constitutional, statutory, and policy problems with this bill. Given time constraints here, I will summarize 3 of the major concerns. First, regarding board agenda setting. I don't really recognize what some of the proponent testimony was describing in terms of how a school board meeting works and the experience of board members. As a school board, an agenda is created and then approved at the beginning of each meeting by a majority vote. The bill, in the way that it's written, astonishingly would allow a single member of the board to insist on putting something on the agenda. And that goes against the will of the majority of the board. Such a proposal is anti-democratic and in conflict with state law and generally accepted principles of good board and legislative governance. A board member at any time can make a motion during a board meeting to amend an agenda and add an item. And all that's required is that that board member get 3 other board members on the Board of Education to agree with them and vote in favor of adding that agenda item. To do away with that by statute would undermine the democratic authority of the majority of the will of a 7-member Board of Education. To approve that language would be to invite chaos, dysfunction, and a profound lack of transparency where such does not currently exist. Second, regarding public comment at board meetings. Under the bill, and the way that it's written, a single board member would be granted the unlimited ability to obstruct the continuation of a public meeting for an unlimited amount of time. Much like a state legislative committee chair, as board president, I have a responsibility and a duty during a board meeting to ensure that the business of the district is completed, that each board member has an opportunity for input and discussion that's meaningful, that members of the public, district staff, and press in attendance at those meetings may safely observe the board conducting its business, and that each member of the public who chooses to do so may participate in the meeting's public comment and is able to do so on the same basis as any other member of the public. This bill does not promote transparency. Rather, its requirements that a single board member can have unlimited time to interact with someone at the board meeting stifles open and transparent consideration of the school board's business by permitting that a single member could overtake the board meeting and impede the discussion and the ability of all 7 board members and members of the public who are there to participate to do so. Third, regarding changes to open records requirements, I highlight for you that this change is specifically targeted only at school board members and specifically excludes each of you and all the other members of every other elected and appointed governing body in the state of Kansas. Requiring school board members to provide their personal work product in response to open records requests is overly intrusive. It would be unprecedented for elected officials in Kansas, and it serves no other legitimate purpose of transparency or good governance. And I'll provide you an example of how that would work. So as board chair, when I prepare for a board meeting, I review my agenda. I take extensive notes for my personal use during the meeting. I may have questions that I know I want to ask. I may see points that need clarification. I print out those notes and I use them during my board meeting. That is my personal work product. And currently under state law, I'm allowed to keep that. This law, if you passed it in its current form, anybody who would want to file an open records request for those personal items that I have created to support my own work as a board member would be entitled to that. That will have a chilling effect on the ability of school board members to do a good job at what they do. As a broader policy matter, I want to pose to the committee the question, I'm unsure why the K-12 Budget Committee is considering this particular bill, given that a number of the provisions have to do with open meetings and open records, and I don't see any budget implications tied to this. The revisor, or the fiscal note attached said that there's no budget implications. So, but since you have it before you, you have the opportunity to reject these anti-transparent and undemocratic proposals. In closing, I ask you to deeply consider this. Would you, as a member of this House committee, be willing to implement all of these rules or any of these rules for your own committee hearings and your own work as a legislator? For those of you who have served in local elected office, would you be willing to serve in that role as a local elected official under these chaotic, disruptive, and overly prescriptive conditions? I'm confident that the answer is no. On behalf of myself and on behalf of the board of USD 497, I respectfully request that you vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Next, we have Leah Flighter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Hard to follow Shannon. She's a trained lawyer, so. We are, as you might imagine, strongly opposed to House Bill 2382. It violates local school boards' constitutional rights to oversee their districts, could subject districts to cyber attacks, and puts boards at risk of violating state and federal privacy laws. My written testimony, which you'll note is kind of lengthy for me. I think I did almost 3 pages, and you know I'm usually kind of a one-page kind of gal in this committee. It details our many objections to the bill, so I won't read it verbatim. But as I've mentioned previously, the advocacy staff is here in the State House every day for this committee, for the other education committees in the House and the Senate, and many other legislative committees. If you have any questions or concerns about how and why school boards are run and why they do the things they do, please don't hesitate to come straight to the source of the accurate information, which is KSB. We're more than happy to put you in touch with professionals who can answer your questions. Touching on some of the transparency issues that we've heard about, I know when I served 8 years on the Manhattan-Ogden USD 383 board, I felt like it was very transparent. You know, the meetings were, I think when I started, we were on local access, cable access TV, which some of you might remember, they only had like a single camera, and they would kind of only, Representative Owsley's kind of laughing. It was sort of like Home Shopping Network in the olden days, but then it got to where people could do them on Facebook, and so so a lot of boards still do stream their meetings on Facebook to make it more accessible. And then, every time you go to the grocery store, you're in the frozen food aisle and you get asked, hey, aren't you Representative Schmoy? Don't you, and you're like, yes, I guess I don't need to buy ice cream right now because it's going to melt, right? So lots of talks about that, and I can't tell you how many times my family would just say, okay, we'll wait for you in the car after church because obviously people want to talk to you. So there, and of course, the phone calls and emails that you get. So we feel that our boards are very transparent about what they do. Some of the concerns that have been raised thus far about how meetings are run can easily be changed just through a tweak of board policy. It really doesn't require a statewide mandate. So I would offer that up as well. And then quickly touching on achievement. I know most of you are very proud of your local school districts. You've heard me talk before about graduation rates being an all-time high. It's puzzling when I read this bill to see how making an email address, and opening districts to cyber attacks, or how we say that a CORA or a COMA request would compensate for a COVID pandemic and underfunding. So that is my text of my comments, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Ann Ma with the State School Board.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee. Happy to be here today, and thank you for allowing us to weigh in opposition to House Bill 2382. Others, obviously, who deal directly with local board meetings will provide all the details about how this bill could create chaos and security risks. Perhaps the most egregious part is requiring local board members to turn over their personal electronic devices if they do some board business on them. I suggest you guys try that first and see how that works for you. Or maybe you could allow any individual member to change the agenda, and I could come in and we could just chat for hours on end about whatever we think is appropriate. But the state board's main interest here is the massive legislative overreach here into the business of locally elected boards of education. According to Article 6 of the Kansas Constitution, local public schools under the general supervision of the State Board of Education shall be maintained, developed, and operated by locally elected boards. And we give them a lot of latitude to manage their business as a school board meeting and public input. They don't need your help. This is not a legislative matter, and a body that routinely does business on very short notice maybe shouldn't be legislating transparency for other elected officials. So we kindly ask you to reject this bill, and I'd be glad to answer questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
And Jerry Hinn, United School Administrator.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. And committee, I appreciate you allowing me to get up here and talk. Before I get started into everything, I wanted to wish everybody a happy President's Day and hope that you got to spend some time honoring the presidents, I guess. So we'll go ahead and get started then. I just wanted to lighten the mood a little bit here, okay? All right. There's not much else that I can jump in on that anybody else or everybody else has already said. Again, concerns about CORA, how that will fit in. Representative Boyd brought up the idea about us or your committee and transparency and all of that as well. So that is obviously a concern of ours. I've been in several school districts in my career before I finally retired. I was in a school district before emails were even around. So understanding that when that became a way of communicating to teachers, administrators. Every district that I was a part of, every Board of Education member had one. Now, I have not done the research to see if every board member in the state of Kansas has an email address, but I can almost guarantee you that there is some way to connect to a board member other than email. You can pick up the phone and call them. What a great way. Face-to-face is always the best kind of conversation anyway. So I think those email addresses are out there for them. The other thing I would like to tell you is that any district that I've been a part of, public comment has always been there. It depends on the district as to how long that public comment is, but it's there. Public has an option to talk in most school districts. Again, I have not done the research, but I can guarantee you in the districts that I was in, the comment was there. And there, yes, sometimes it gets painful to listen to, but we are there for the kids and we are there to listen and make our schools better for those kids. And that's what it's about. So I'll stand for questions whenever the time's appropriate.
All right, committee, what questions do you have? And before I take your questions, is there anyone that met the deadline that we missed for opponent? All right, committee, what questions do you have? Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for Kansas Association of School Boards. Well, I think maybe, could you, maybe I need an attorney answer on this. Would you have an attorney
I
present?
do. I brought my
would really like
attorney,
to
and
hear from
I'm
your
hoping I
attorney
can
today.
phone a friend. She's also a registered lobbyist, just so everybody knows.
This is very good. Do you think this bill, if passed, would affect the Kansas Association of School Boards since they share communications with all the districts and all the boards? Would this have implications affecting Kansas Association of School Boards?
Thank you, Representative Johnson. I should introduce myself.
Could you identify
Yes, I
yourself?
apologize. My name is Angie Stahlbaumer. I am Deputy Director and General Counsel at KSB. I don't know that this would really impact us any more than Open Records Act anyway. I mean, we have attorneys that communicate with boards of education, so I guess in the context of attorney-client privilege, we would certainly like to maintain that ability to keep those records among board members asking for legal advice. But as far as our general communications with members, I don't see it changing a whole lot there.
One last question. Previously, for 2 years, I've been able to receive the KASB newsletter, and I have found some of the reading and some of the articles just excellently well done. But now I've no longer receive it, and I've asked, and I wondered why I'm no longer able to receive that communication.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that honestly, we've had a change of the guard to a degree in our communication staff, so I think it's a matter of just getting you on the list again, so I don't think that's a problem. We'll take care of it.
Thank this response from one of my best friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions, committee? Representative Boyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leah, are you aware of any other districts that do not have a public comment section in their open meeting?
I'm not aware. Now, there's 286 of them across the state, so I'm not at every single one of them. But it is a board policy decision. I think most of them do, because that's the way for the public, to come and speak publicly.
Thank you.
Sure.
Representative Lidwer.
Well, we've actually had some school boards across the state that have not allowed public comments during the school board meetings. And we've actually had 2 school districts down my direction that actually told everyone that the school board was not for the public, it was for them.
Well, I can't comment on something that's not, if you have a specific district that you want to have us respond to, you could contact them directly. I think there's cases where public comment might not be accepted at a special board meeting, which is only for, a certain process. There's also, I know in a couple of cases, there were some concerns about YouTube was going to kick the school district off of the YouTube list because of misinformation that was being spoken at a school board meeting. So that could be part of it. I mean, not knowing any more detail than that, I'm afraid I can't really answer helpfully.
Well, the school districts have been talking, it actually came out of the mouth of the president of the board at the time, both of those school districts. And wasn't KSB involved here, a couple years ago with joining on to the idea that parents were basically terrorists with their comments
No,
and stuff?
we were
in
not.
School boards?
We were not.
You didn't play a part in that at all?
We did not. In fact, we pushed back against that pretty hard.
All right, thank you.
Committee, any other questions? Representative Estes.
Ms. Flighter, thank you for staying at the podium. We've talked about concerns I have about when agendas come out.
Yes.
And of course, and I think sometimes we miscommunicate on this because I think the people who feel happily served are very happy to talk to
Right.
you.
It's kind of like a Yelp review,
People who
right?
feel, okay, and as I was saying, the people who don't, they come to me or they come to other people on this board and say, I feel frustrated. I'm saying, I'm asking for things. I'm not getting what I want. I don't feel like I'm getting the agenda. And I'm not allowed to ask questions about what's on the agenda until the day of the meeting. And it doesn't lead to the best understanding of the complex issues that need to be understood if you don't get to ask that question. And to me, why the public comment is important is because, and I'm sitting here scanning 259's board policies to find when you must register to be on their public comment. But if what I have been told is correct, you have to register before you even know what's on the public comment. But I want to be clear and fair that I may not be 100% accurate on that and that might be another district. But I think that I've shown up to meetings and been frustrated when I, as a parent, especially when COVID was going on, could not talk because we're trying to solve something none of us expected. So yes, public comment probably does exist in most districts, but it's not always parent-friendly.
Well, I think that can be addressed by, as I think I mentioned, tweaking the board policy. So if someone has an issue and a concern, have they talked to the superintendent? Have they talked to,
Exactly. They come to me after they've had an unsatisfactory conversation with their superintendent and their board.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And to know that it would be the board that you'd want to talk to, probably not the superintendent, because the superintendent is subject to the board's not subject to the superintendent. All right, thank you. Committee, other questions? Representative Hill. Let us know who you'd like to direct your question to.
Board Member Moss, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Ann. I had a little bit of a question on something you indicated there, and I wanted you to talk about it a little bit more. You indicated that the State Board of Education has general oversight over local boards of education. Could you explain to me exactly what does general oversight mean?
Well, the Supreme Court has said that they've drawn some red lines around things like accreditation, teacher credentialing, certification, those kinds of things. So there are a lot of interpretations, but generally what the Constitution says, maintain, develop, and operate. So that's the best constitutional guidance that we have. And we work with them. I mean, there's lines between the legislature and the state board. There are lines between the state board and the local boards, and it all works better when we all work together. And we all have times when we don't like who crossed the line, a little too much. Like, for example, we've got a hearing tomorrow on Eddie Eagle, And I think that ought to be local control. And one of the superintendents said, me too. He goes, can we have local control over accreditation and teacher licensure? And I said, no, because we have the obligation to be responsible for results, so we're going to, look at things more closely. But there's always a line between those entities, and we try to give, in Kansas, local boards as much local control as they can. That's why we believe a one-size-fits-all, here's how you run your board meetings, just isn't appropriate.
So following up that question a little bit then, do you offer any guidance on local board operating procedures?
In how they run their meeting? Not that I'm aware of, because they're locally elected, they have their own local policies on that, and you have 286 districts, and they get guidance from KASB on that, but we don't give them guidance on how to run that meeting. We do try to set a good example. We routinely change our agenda if we get a majority of members who agree. One member might make a recommendation, we vote on it, we either change it or we don't, and we have opportunity for public input every month. So we do try to set a good example.
So what you just said to me is that your general oversight is not as important as KASB's oversight. Is that what you said?
Only in this very narrow thing of how you run your board meeting. We have a lot to say about almost every other thing they do.
Okay. Well, that's I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Shannon, I just have a few quick questions. Shannon, out of curiosity, when you have public comment for your school board, are they required to register prior, and how much time are they given once the agenda is public?
In our district, our agendas come out on Thursday before the Monday board meeting. My board meets twice a month, so the previous Thursday, that agenda will come out. The people are allowed to sign up for public comment up until the moment that our meeting starts. We have, I give guidance before the meeting starts, about 5 minutes. I make an announcement. If you're here and you want to give public comment, please make sure you have registered your name with our board clerk. And then that way, we ask people to provide their name and their email address so that if they give public comment and it is something that does require follow-up from either the board itself or because there's information that we need district staff to provide to that person, we have a way to contact that person once that information is gathered and it can be provided. I would also note that all districts have board policy manuals, and because as members of KASB, we direct the work of the association through the board of directors of KASB. My district is a member of KASB. They provide model policies for districts to use to try to help with some of that work. We have a policy, KN, in my district that deals with complaints and concerns. And one of the things that it says is that if you, as a parent, have a complaint or a concern about something that's happening in your building, we really want you to start in the first instance with the teacher, the classroom teacher, or the principal. And if that doesn't work out, then there's a process in that policy to follow. The idea being that by the time that they have arrived at a board meeting to give public comment, particularly about something that they're upset about, they have worked through the resources that are available to them with our professional staff in the district, and that the people who actually are going to be doing the work to solve their problems have had an opportunity to hear those problems and respond. By the time it gets to public comment at a board meeting, the board will hear that, and then if there's follow-up that needs to happen, we're going to work with our staff to follow up and make sure that that person's concern is addressed. So we remind people in our public comment preface, if you haven't done this procedure, please consider doing it. But we allow them to come and give that comment, and they can sign up, clear up until the moment the meeting starts.
Well, I think that's great policy that you allow them to sign up, and that would take care of some of the concerns that we heard from Representative Estes. I would say with 286 school districts, not all of them do have policy manuals. I know a school district that I represent, when new board members came on, they were shocked that there was no policy manual. And so they were looking at neighboring school districts to kind of find out what are those guidelines. So I think that that's a great thing for every school district and every board to have, but I don't know that they all do. I'm sure KSB could survey and find out that. My last question's on forms, because I do know personally that it's frustrating for me when I want to reach out to my school board members, not anymore because now I've requested it, but when there's a form for the teacher or the school board member rather than an actual email. Does your school district use the forms, or do you have your emails posted?
I have an email address that is skimball@usd497.org. It is posted on the website along with a phone number at which I can be reached. Those emails come directly to me, and but I do hear the concern, and one of the things I would point out about that is I represent USD 497 Lawrence. We're the 7th largest school district in the state. We have IT staff. We have IT staff who help us run our network and take care of all of those things. I would caution the committee to consider that when you are talking about the entirety of the 286 districts in our state, some of which are very, very small, they do not maybe have the same capacity to do the kind of security monitoring of those emails that has to happen. I routinely get emails, spam emails, phishing emails through that USD email. We have a dedicated person that I send those to when there are security concerns who follows up and addresses that to make sure that we're not inadvertently creating a network security issue as board members. I would not want to say to this committee that I could represent that every school district has the financial wherewithal in our state to have someone like that on their staff to take care of those issues. And so I think that's where getting into the question of allowing boards to have local control to make some decisions around what they have the capacity to do in that area is really important.
Well, Shannon, I just a couple comments on that. Number one, I would think if your board, your 7-member board would be easy to train versus how many hundreds of employees you have. I do serve on legislative post audit, so I know the IT security audits that we do for not only school districts, but our agency. So I would think having transparency and access for parents would be a highest priority, and that they could easily be taught just like, to how to avoid phishing problems just like any other employee, and even more so, they're an elected official. The other thing I would say is that in our current age of technology, everybody has an email, except maybe some of our kids that just want to, Snapchat. But everybody has an email, and if you're an elected official, every elected official should have some publishable way to reach them. And I firmly believe that as a person that has served in local government. And when I served in local government, we did not have a city address. I gave my own personal email address. And so I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't think that this is incumbent on perhaps a district to have one, but to make it available. And even in the last few years, just trying to get email addresses for my community college, they weren't even listed. They didn't have anything. So that was probably 4 years ago when I said, how am I supposed to contact our board of trustees? So I think it is probably more of a problem than maybe you recognize in where you are. It's not a problem for you, but in other areas it may be. But I don't think technology is an issue anywhere. I've looked at many small district websites, and they're pretty fancy. They have the same ability to update and maintain documents without, it seems like, missing a beat. So, but thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you. I would add that it does take a lot of staff time, and that is sometimes a very precious resource, even for a district as large as mine, given the budget constraints that we operate under. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
You are so welcome. But considering the last 20 years, we've increased our budget by, 168% or 100 something quite significant. And for the per pupil funding in the last 20 years, we've increased by 135.5% per pupil, whereas the CPIU index for the Midwest was 68%. So the good news is that Kansas is exceeding the rate of inflation in the amount that they're giving per pupil. So that's always reassuring to know that you'd be able to manage a few emails for your potentially 7 new board members. All right, any other comments? If there are no other questions for House Bill, then we will go ahead and close for 2382, the hearing on 2382, and we are adjourned.